Welcome, everyone, to Archangels Live. I am your host, Tom. Today, I will be talking about In My Father's Footsteps by William Matson. But first, as always, we will be praying to Archangel Michael. Michael, come with your sword of light, suit of armor, and with your countless legions of angels to light, to guard, to rule, to guide, to protect and defend us now and always. Come, Divine Master of supreme divine protection. Strike away any negative or dark energy from us at all times. Strike away all times needed, all energy that belongs to others, that will no longer affect us in any way. We do not accept in any way energy from others unless it is loving and in the highest vibrations of the highest God. Envelop us with your divine wings. Wrap them completely around us and enclose us in your protective energy. Always, at every moment of each day and each night, we bless and return any energy that does not belong to us or that is sent to us by anyone at any time. We return it to the senders. We ask these things as we do all things in God's name. Amen. I'll be reading from Meditations with Native American Elders. Ultimately, nature will do the teaching. This is a quote by Tom Porter, Mohawk. There are things man has control over, and there are things man does not have control over. No matter how smart we get, whether it be in technology or science, there are things we will never control. The Great Spirit carefully protected and hid the control over certain things in the unseen world. There are forces in the unseen world that make sure humans don't mess things up. The bottom line is, no matter what we do, nature will always have the last say. Nature is the teacher. We are the students. May we honor and respect our teacher. Once again, I was going to read from this new release by William Matson, and I'm going to read the back. For nearly a century, the Lakota and Cheyenne had kept private their ancestors' history of the Battle of Little Bighorn. Few non-Lakota knew the full story. That is, until author William Matson set out to fulfill his father's dying wish, to tell the Lakota side of the Little Bighorn struggle and its aftermath. Matson reached out to the closest living relatives of Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull to document, with permission, their never before publicly told oral histories, a journey that even renowned historians had not accomplished. And this was the first book that he put out. It was released in September 2016. And it's the Family of Crazy Horses oral story. Going to read about the Sweat Lodge. Weathered pieces of canvas and old carpets covered the dome-shaped Sweat Lodge. The opening faced to the west. A small mound of dirt, which they referred to as an altar, sat a few feet in front of the opening. A few more feet to the west, a large pit contained a layer of spent ashes. I asked Floyd, who took charge of preparing the sweat, if the fire to heat the rocks would happen in the pit. I had gathered as much from my reading. He confirmed it was. Then he explained this ceremony further. When we go into the sweat, we breathe the Creator's air. We bring hot rocks, which represent fire and our Mother Earth, into the sweat lodge and place them in the center. We pour water on the rocks, which mixes with the air to create steam. That way we have all the elements of the Creator: fire, water, earth, air, all mixed to make the Creator's air. Floyd showed me the rocks they would use. He called them lava rocks because they formed through volcanic activity. He said they preferred them because they didn't split or crack when they got hot. There was also a pile of cut logs and tree limbs nearby, which were used to build and feed the fire that heated the rocks. Floyd began preparations for our ceremony. He stacked the larger logs neatly in the pit to build a base for the fire. He then stacked several lava rocks on top of the logs. Seeing the others bring him rocks, I joined in and helped. After we gathered enough rocks for the sweat, I noticed everyone began bringing him wood. So I collected wood too. Once I brought him my first load of wood, I got swept up by my enthusiasm, and suddenly I couldn't bring him wood fast enough. I ran for more wood. Then my run turned into a sprint. Floyd arranged the wood I brought all around the rocks in a teepee-like shape. My zeal in helping bring the wood to build a fire caused my hosts to give pause. Their eyes followed my every move. "This guy kind of scares me," I overheard Bentley say to Floyd. My enthusiasm may have been a little over the top, but it was an honest response to the opportunity presented to me. Once Floyd lit the fire, it was only a few minutes before it was a full-fledged bonfire. As we sat by the fire waiting for the rocks to heat, the family members and Kevin schooled me on what to know for my first sweat. If it gets too hot for you, just lie down. That's where the cooler air is, down by the ground. Doug suggested there's little pieces of sage scattered on the floor of the sweat. Just pick some up and hold it by your mouth and nose while you breathe. It will cool you down. Kevin gave a different scenario. He said I would come out looking like a cooked and blistered lobster. I called silently to the spirit of my dad to join me in the lodge and give me courage. They instructed me to say "Mitakuye Oyasin" as I entered and exited the sweat lodge. It was a Lakota greeting to everything that populates Mother Earth and beyond. It means we are all related. Everything on Earth and in the sky is a relative to the Lakota. They're all part of the oneness and harmony of creation. They also said I could say "Mitakuye Oyasin" if it got too hot and I needed the door open. I practiced saying out loud. Gales of laughter met my awkward pronunciation. For much of the rest of our wait for the rocks to heat, Doug and Don coached me on how to say it properly. It didn't come easily for me. Floyd informed me after the sweat we would smoke and pray with the sacred pipe. He said the smoke from it would carry our prayers to all places, so the Creator would know what prayer we carried in our hearts. By late afternoon, the stones were red hot. Don, Floyd, and Kevin planted their personal staffs deep into the dirt altar so they stood upright. Many eagle feathers and a wide swath of red cloth embellished Don's staff. It was beautiful and ornate. He said a friend had made it for him. Floyd's and Kevin's consisted of an unadorned branches of wood with their spiritual medicines attached. Floyd loaded his pipe with tobacco, while Don beat a hand drum with a padded drumstick and sang a Lakota song. We all stood with our hats off out of respect for the pipe being loaded. Even though I didn't understand the words in their song, I understood the significance and gravity of being there. Once the song and pipe filling finished, we disrobed and entered the sweat lodge. Each of us said Matakwe Oesin as we entered. The floor of the sweat lodge was cool, damp, hardened dirt, sprinkled with sweat sage leaves. I sat between Doug and Kevin. Bentley stayed outside. After we were all seated, Bentley carried the glowing red rocks, balanced on the prongs of a pitchfork, from the fire into the sweat lodge. He placed them into a small, shallow pit in the center of the lodge. The rocks lit up and warmed the lodge immediately. I drew my legs close to my body to keep my feet from touching the indigenous rocks. Next to the lodge opening sat Floyd with a large hollow buffalo horn and a big white plastic tub filled with water. After Bentley finished delivering the rocks, dried flat cedar, sweetgrass, and sage were sprinkled on them. The sprinklings instantly crackled and burned to a crisp. Then the opening to the lodge was closed, and the only light came from the intense glow of the rocks. Floyd filled his buffalo horn from the tub and slowly poured the water onto the rocks. They sizzled and hissed as the water cascaded over them and dimmed their glow. The steam that resulted slammed into my lungs and rocked me to my core. I breathed shallower for fear that my lungs might get burned. Because it was my first time, it was difficult to judge how hot a temperature I would have to endure. However, I determined to last the entire ceremony without lying down or breathing with sage next to my mouth. I wanted to show my heart was not only a good heart, but a strong one too. Don brought his hand drum into the sweat lodge. Floyd continued to pour water over the rocks while they sang. Not knowing the words to the songs, I just listened and bobbed my head to the beat. Once they finished their third song, Floyd shouted, "Matakwe Oesin." Bentley opened the sweat lodge door in response. The cool air from outside gave us immediate relief from the heat. They asked me how I was managing. "Good," I answered. Floyd explained they would close and open the sweat lodge door 3 more times, for 4 times altogether, which would be the full length of the ceremony. With that said, the door closed. The second round went much like the first round. More steam and 3 more Lakota songs. By the middle of the second round, my body and lungs had completely adapted to the heat. It was wonderful. When the second round ended and the door opened, Bentley brought in the rest of the rocks from the fire. Floyd said, in the third round, I will say my prayer in English. Theirs would be spoken in Lakota. Prayers would be said in a clockwise progression. So I would say mine after Kevin. The cue was to listen for him to say Matakwe Oasin. All prayers ended with that phrase. Don said his prayer first. Kevin followed. When Kevin said Matakwe Oasin, it became my turn. I thanked the Creator for the opportunity to sweat with my new friends and ask him to look after them and their families. I also asked he look after my family as well. I prayed for everyone on Mother Earth to have a better life. Then I said, Matakwe Oasin. Doug prayed, then Floyd. Finally, upon finishing their prayers, the door opened and then closed for the fourth and final round. They sang 3 more Lakota songs. As the fourth round ended, Floyd emptied the rest of the water from the big white tub over the rocks. It gave us a final extreme rush of heat. Then he shouted, Matakwe Oasin. Bentley opened the door and it was over. We exited the lodge saying Matakwe Oasin. Our sweat-drenched bodies met the cool evening air. It felt great. The ceremony had lasted over 2 hours. We used our towels to dry off and got dressed. As we stood in a circle near the opening of the sweat lodge, Floyd lit his pipe. His pipe had a simple red pipe stone bowl connected to about a foot-long wooden stem. We passed it around clockwise. Each one of us took a few puffs while saying a silent prayer of thanks. After we finished smoking the pipe, we shook hands and thanked each other for the shared experience. So once again, In My Father's Footsteps by William Matson, brand new release. And this was his first book about the Crazy Horse family. So I thank you for listening. I thank you for joining me.